Here we back. Now, what inspired this video is I got a comment in my comment section. You know, sometimes I cover political topics, and this brother came into my comment section and he started, talking about, Russia and China and things like that. And I basically responded to him and I said this: the average black man or woman is trying to send their kids to school, earn a decent living, and feed their families. They're not worried about Russia or China. That's a topic for CNN or Fox News and Western think tanks. The white man is worried about Russia and China. The black man is trying to feed his family and develop his nations. We have different interests. If you notice on my channel, I don't even mention the words China or Russia because it's a distraction. Now, usually when people mention things like Russia or, China as it relates to African politics, they speak in a very, disrespectful way when they talk about the political sophistication of the black man. And as somebody who studied the history of the black man very in depth, I don't get involved in the Russia and China debates because I'm somebody that's aware of the fact that political allegiances can switch at any moment. You're not bound to maintain the same political alliance for the rest of existence. You could wake up tomorrow and say, I'm not rocking with them folks over there. I'm switching teams. I'm rocking with somebody else, man. And this was actually exemplified to the highest degree during the Haitian Revolution, right? In terms of political sophistication, I know we talk about the battles and we talk about the bloodshed, but we never really talk about the political science behind the Haitian Revolution, right? And that's why on my channel, I don't get involved in the Russia and China debates because I know that's Western driven nonsense, because nobody says the same thing about Iran or Turkey or any of the various countries that have businesses and are active in different industries across Africa. But when it comes to Russia and China, everybody acting like that's the big boogeyman. So I don't get involved in that. That's a distraction coming out of Western think tanks. Now, today in this video, I'm gonna break down the political allegiances and the political, maneuvering that took place during the Haitian Revolution and how those black men during that time were able to come out on top and empower themselves at the expense of their enemies. Now, during this video, I'm going to be discussing the political careers of Toussaint Louverture and King Henry Christophe, right? I'm not going to really do Dessalines because Dessalines was only in power for about 2 years. He didn't really get enough time to operate in the functions of government, but Toussaint Louverture occupied a position of leadership for over 10 years, and King Henry Christophe occupied a position of leadership for damn near 20 years. So, not wasting no time, let's jump straight into it. Now, during that time, you got to understand, there was no such thing as the European Union. There was no such thing as the United Nations. There was no such thing as NATO. There was no such thing as any of these international organizations that exist today to promote, European supremacy. During that time, it was pretty much every man for himself. And that was an advantage to the black men living during that time, because then you could use the different interests of the different European powers and use that against them to empower yourself at their expense. And that's why I encourage African nations to expand their relationships, partner up with whoever is beneficial for you during that time. Don't be scared to play the different world powers against each other to empower yourself at their expense. Now let's take a look at how our forefathers were able to maneuver in the political arena. As you already know, in 1791, the Haitian Revolution broke out. And during that time, there was a rivalry between France and Spain. So who do you think that the rebels were able to partner up with to acquire resources, military training, military equipment to ride down on the French, the Spanish that were next door in the Spanish colony of Santo Domingo? The Spanish controlled the eastern half of Hispaniola, and by arming the rebels, they saw that as a way to weaken French control on the western half of the island. Remember, like I said, there was no European Union during that time. There were no regional blocks operating together during that time, unlike today where France and Spain are both part of the European Union. But during that time, they were rivals battling for supremacy. And the French portion of the island was the wealthiest colony in the world during that time, thanks to its sugar, coffee, and indigo plantations. So of course, you already know, the Spanish, they wanted a piece of the action. And the rebels, they wanted to drive the French out. So it was mutual interest at play. And with the help of the Spanish, Toussaint Louverture was able to establish supremacy over the northern and western half of the French colony. And I believe it was around 1793, with the colony damn near upside down, the French had sent some ambassadors, or commissioners as they were called, around 1793 to free the slaves, to abolish slavery, right? They had to make concessions to the blacks because the blacks were inflicting heavy damage and they wanted to maintain the colony. So when Toussaint Louverture realized that the Spanish had no plans to ever truly abolish slavery and they were only playing for their own personal interests, he abandoned his loyalty to the Spanish crown and went back to the French, who actually began to make promises to emancipate the slaves and grant the slaves their freedom. Take a look up on the screen. It was during this time, and due to the new trend of conceding rights to blacks, that Toussaint Louverture began reforming his political philosophy to embrace French rather than Spain. However, he was cautious and awaited French ratification of emancipation before officially changing sides. On February 4th, 1794, the French National Convention ratified this and applying it to all French colonies, including Guadeloupe. So around 1793, 1794, the French were down on their goddamn knees. The colony was up in flames. They had no choice but to compromise and make some concessions over to the blacks. And not only was the enslaved population emancipated down in Haiti, as you can see, they were emancipated across all French colonies. So when that law was passed, Toussaint Louverture switched back to the French. And the names of the commissioners that were sent by the French to emancipate the slaves, it was Etienne Poverel and Léger Sontenax. Now, let's read, take a look up on the screen. Although Poverel and Sontenax were abolitionists, they had no intention of abolishing slavery when they arrived in September in the colony, and they had not received the right to do so. To preserve the colony for France, however, they were forced to give freedom to the black slaves who would fight on their side. Under pressure, between August 27th and October 31st, 1793, they progressively gave freedom to all the slaves of Saint-Domingue. Now, Léger Sontenax, take a look up on the screen. That's this fat boy right here. You know, fat boy Sontenax. He was the one that convinced Toussaint Louverture to get back on the side of the French. And he was the one that actually passed the law, you know, freeing the slaves and everybody like that. So, yeah, shout out to Léger Sontenax. And it was actually through Léger Sontenax that Toussaint Louverture was able to get over 100,000 guns for his army. And during this time fighting on the side of the French, he rose up the ranks up to Brigadier General and then Governor General of the colony. And if you know the story of the Haitian Revolution, by the time Toussaint Louverture rose up to Governor General of the colony, he forced all the ambassadors, all the French ambassadors, to go the fuck home. Yeah, he was like, yeah, go home or I'm gonna make you go home. And they couldn't really do shit about it because once he became Governor General and he had the armed forces behind him and the majority of the population was the enslaved population, the French ambassadors had no choice but to go home. So by 1798, Toussaint Louverture was the de facto ruler of the colony of Saint-Domingue. And during the 1790s, when he was fighting on the side of the French, he was fighting against the incursions coming from the Spanish and the British, who wanted to conquer the western half of Hispaniola, because like I told you, that was the wealthiest colony in the world. So the Spanish wanted a peace, the British wanted a peace, and they wanted to enforce slavery. So Toussaint Louverture and the men that were fighting alongside him, Toussaint and Christophe and everybody like that, they felt that they were fighting to maintain their freedom. And the French were willing to grant them their freedom in order to maintain the colony, in order to maintain their economy. So similar to when Toussaint Louverture had a line with the Spanish at the beginning, because the Spanish wanted to drive out the French and Toussaint Louverture also wanted to drive out the French. Now, in order to maintain his freedom, in order to maintain the emancipation of the enslaved population, he aligned with the French to keep the Spanish and the British out, because the Spanish and the British wanted to invade and reinstate slavery and reinforce slavery. And by 1798, the British forces were soundly defeated. And Thomas Maitland and Toussaint Louverture negotiated a secret agreement, as you can see, take a look up on the screen. Once the British had realized that their hopes of expanding the colonial empire into Saint-Domingue was pretty much, it was dead and gone, they negotiated an agreement with Toussaint Louverture, basically recognizing Toussaint Louverture as the de facto ruler of the colony. It was a ceasefire, an agreement for British forces to withdraw from the colony, putting an end to all hostilities between British forces and the Haitian rebels. And in exchange for British recognition and support, Toussaint Louverture agreed to maintain peace and good relations with the British, which would come in handy because the British would later blockade the French forces during the invasion years later, around 1802, 1803. Take a look up on the screen. It was in fact Thomas Maitland and not the War Ministry who had determined that Britain's only sensible choice, rather than try to maintain any kind of presence at Jeremy or Mont Saint Nicolas, was to deal directly with Louverture and negotiate a total evacuation of the island. Accordingly, he and the Black General concluded a secret agreement on August 31st, 1798. Great Britain would desist from any further attack on Saint-Domingue and any interference with its internal affairs. Louverture made a similar promise with regard to Jamaica, and Maitland would see that provisions were allowed to reach the port of Saint-Domingue without interference from British cruisers. Now, once the British and the Spanish and the French ambassadors were evacuated from the island, Toussaint Louverture only had one man standing in his way, and that was André Rigaud, a young general from the South who was the son of a white man. He came from an elite plantation-owning family, and he had no interest in the abolition of slavery. Toussaint Louverture controlled the North, André Rigaud controlled the South. In 1799, a civil war broke out, with André Rigaud having the backing of France and Toussaint Louverture having the backing of the United States. And the reason why Toussaint Louverture was able to get the backing of the United States is because, like I said, he was playing the different world powers against each other. During that time, the Americans and the French, they were beefing. They were going through what they call the quasi-war. Take a look up on the screen. The quasi-war was an undeclared naval war fought from 1798 to 1800 between the United States and the French First Republic, primarily in the Caribbean and off the east coast of the United States. So in 1799, when the Civil War broke out between Toussaint Louverture and Henri Rigaud, the United States decided to provide weapons, resources, and military assistance to the military of Toussaint Louverture because they seen Henri Rigaud as a symbol of French interest. So in order to attack the French, they decided to arm the rebels that were fighting against Henri Rigaud. And of course, later in the year 1800, Henri Rigaud and his army fled into exile back to France. So by the year 1800, Toussaint Louverture was the most powerful man in the entire colony. And it was around that time that he drafted his own constitution, naming him Governor General for life. And that was the reason that the French decided to invade. Because once Toussaint Louverture began to draft his own constitution and say that I'm going to be the ruler for life, then the French was like, okay, listen. This little Negro, you know what I'm saying? This little Negro, he getting too big for his britches. This little Negro, he feeling himself a little bit too much now. You know, we gave him the rank of general, and now he's talking about he's drafting his own constitution. He's going to be in power for life. Man, what the fuck, man? Listen, send the goddamn army ASAP. We about to reinstate slavery. So that's what happened. That's what led to the death of Toussaint Louverture. And that's why on my channel, you never see me have these conversations about, you know, China and Russia. If a black nation wants to have economic relations with China or Russia, it doesn't matter to me because I don't view these relationships as something that are permanent. There are no allies or enemies in politics. There are only permanent interests. And as long as my interests align with yours, we can do business. But if our interests no longer align, then I'm going in a different direction. And that's the nature of politics. If we studied our forefathers, then we would understand the level of political sophistication that we need in order to navigate the world. You know, but anyways, let's take a look at the political career of King Henry Christophe. Christophe started his military career at the age of 12 in the French army as a drummer boy. And he actually served in the American Revolution in the late 1770s, spending most of his time in the southern United States, Florida, Georgia, etc., etc. Christophe spent the majority of his life fighting for the French crown, starting as a young teenager. In 1791, around the age of 23-24 years old, he joined the ranks of Toussaint Louverture's army. And just like Toussaint Louverture, Christophe rose up the ranks of the French military, defending the colony against the Spanish and the British, under the leadership of Toussaint Louverture. And even though Christophe was one of the youngest during the Haitian Revolution, Toussaint Louverture appointed him as the commanding general of the capital of the colony around the age of 34 years old. I believe Christophe was elected to that position around the year 1802, shortly before Toussaint Louverture was captured and assassinated. As we already know, in the year 1804, Haiti established its independence, and in the year 1806, after the death of Toussaint, Christophe established his own sovereign government in the north of Haiti called the Kingdom of Haiti. Now, even though during this time, the European nations did not want to recognize Haiti as a sovereign nation, you had nations such as the British that continued to do commerce with Haiti, continued to do business with Haiti, continued to come by the coffee and the sugar and everything in between because, like I said, that was the wealthiest colony during that time and it was the #1 producer of coffee and sugar. And also, as you already know, during that time, the rivalry between the British and the French, it was on fire during that time. So of course, Christophe during that time, he used the rivalry between the British and the French, the division between the British and the French to empower himself and empower his own economy and empower his own government. Keep in mind, similar to the rivalry between the Spanish and the French, it was all about colonial possession. It was all about different nations battling for supremacy. As you already know, both Britain and France, they possessed extensive overseas territories during this period. They competed for control of valuable colonies, particularly in North America and the Caribbean. Also, keep in mind, the British Royal Navy and the French Navy were two of the most powerful naval forces in the world during that time. So control of the seas, it was crucial for trade and colonial dominance, leading to frequent naval confrontations. And in fact, the British played a key role in the final battle of the Haitian Revolution when they blockaded the ports in the capital that destroyed the French. They surrendered after that. Many people don't know that. Just like the Americans, they blockaded Henri Rigaud during the Civil War, the British blockaded the French in the final battle in 1803. So when Christophe came to power, his main trading partner was the British. When he established his schools, he imported teachers from Great Britain. When he established his hospitals, he acquired doctors and vaccination from the British. In fact, take a look up on the screen. I actually got a letter written from Christophe to Mr. James Moore, director of the British National Vaccine Establishment. And the reason why the British decided to provide this level of support to Christophe's government is because the British had a long history of geopolitical rivalry with the French. And also, Haiti was a valuable territory known for its lucrative coffee and sugar production. So British merchants and traders saw the economic potential in establishing trade relations with Christophe's government. And also knowing firsthand the capacity of the Haitian military during that time, because they were destroyed by the Haitian military back in 1798. They did not want the revolution in Haiti to be spread to the British colonies, down in Jamaica, down in Grenada, etc., etc. So in exchange for arming his government, for being his biggest trading partner, Christophe negotiated with the British, basically saying, listen, I won't even touch your colonies. Listen, you don't got nothing to worry about. As long as you notify me of any French activity in the ocean, any French activity in the water, any political activity over in Europe, listen, I'm not going to touch Jamaica. I'm not going to touch Grenada. I'm not going to touch Barbados. I'm not going to touch Trinidad. I'm not going to touch St. Lucia. I'm not going to touch St. Kitts. I'm not going to touch the Cayman Islands. I'm not going to touch Bermuda. I'm not going to touch the Bahamas. I'm not going to touch St. Vincent. Listen, you don't got nothing to worry about. The only thing I'm trying to do is develop my nation, get my money, feed my people, take care of my people, keep my people safe. I ain't trying to export the revolution around the world, man. And Christophe pretty much enjoyed a very lucrative and healthy relationship with the British until the day he died. I mean, British generals would come to the presidential palace, like Sir Henry Christophe. He would be kicking it at the palace. And in fact, Sir Henry Christophe was actually used as a mediator between Christophe and the Southern Mulatto generals during the year 1819. If you've watched my videos on Christophe, then I'm sure you already know this information. Another one of Christophe's political allies included British abolitionist Thomas Clarkson, who, if you remember, Christophe paid Thomas Clarkson $1.1 million to go politic on his behalf, to go lobby on his behalf during negotiations with the French government. Man, Christophe had that paper, man. Christophe had that bag and was like, man, go negotiate on my behalf. Go to France and negotiate on behalf of my government, playboy. So yeah. And it was also with the help of Thomas Clarkson that Christophe was able to establish his schools, able to establish his hospitals, and was able to introduce vaccination into his country. And it was also through Thomas Clarkson that Christophe was able to meet Prince Saunders, an African-American professor who ended up becoming a high-ranking member in Christophe's government. And it was also through Thomas Clarkson that Christophe was able to write a letter to the Emperor of Russia and establish diplomatic relations with the Emperor of Russia. And it was actually, Russia was one of the first nations to actually recognize Haiti. Many people do not even know that. And similar to the British, the Russians also had a rivalry against the French during that time. So just like Toussaint Louverture, his mentor, Christophe was able to play the different world powers against each other to empower himself, his government, and his own nation. And in summary, that's what politics is all about, man. Politics, there are no permanent allies. There are no permanent interests in politics. If we have mutual interests at play on a table, then we can do business. If our interests no longer align, then I'm going in a different direction. That's the name of the game. That's politics, man. And I think a large part of the reason why we are not playing the political game at a high level is because, number one, we do not study the political sophistication of our forefathers. Number two, we do not study the political systems of our forefathers. So we're kind of just winging it. You know, we just playing it. We're not really playing it with the templates left behind by our ancestors. We don't really study the men that came before us. So we don't really know what to do, man. Even though there is nothing new under the sun. All the solutions to all your problems can be solved by just studying history, man. Study history, take the lessons of the past and apply it to what is applicable in the present day. I think it's disrespectful to assume that if a black nation establishes bilateral relationships with, for example, Russia or China or Iran or Turkey or whatever, I think it's disrespectful to assume that they're entering a colonial relationship, right? Because I don't view it like that. I view it as a sovereign nation doing business with another sovereign nation with mutual interests on the table. And if those interests no longer align, then we can go in a different direction. There are no permanent enemies or allies in politics, only permanent interests. Anyways, man, it's your boy Neferkari Desalegn back in the building. Yes, indeed. Cash App up on the screen, and I'm gone. Peace.
Reincarnated, I'm back in original fashion. I left on a horse and came back in that ass, and I left with abundance and came back to famine. We used to be pyramids, now we be rapping. Look how the mighty have fallen. Used to be running, now we be walking. When you be cooning, that's when they applauded. Selling your soul, your sons and your daughter. Gotta come up in this shit, they stuck in the mix. Really, my heart to be breaking. That's why I'm stacking that paper and handle my business. Pass it down in generation. Talking about money and power and building a nation. That's a deadly combination. Never be watching the TV, they pushing agendas, falsifying information. Know they got malice intentions. Step in the room and I'm feeling the tension. Enemy watching, he blocking my vision. Get for the check cause I need my redemption. Building my kingdom, I need it protected. Ready for war like a young Money Congo. Never decided the team is the motto. Up in the crib and I'm whipping up waffles. Up in the crib and I'm smoking gelato. I'm chilling, I'm taking my pain. fame, they make it ambition. I'm blessed by the gods, but I ain't religious. I came for the power, they came for the bitch. They making no hourly wage, I got business. This is an art, and they could never be taught. Selling my soul, I can never be bought. Play with my money, I see you ain't caught. Run to the check and I do it for sport. Babylon falling, I go to the source. Packing my luggage and go overseas. Shorty be with me and she so elite. Shorty be chocolate, I'm calling her Hershey. Secret intelligence probably gon' murk me. Don't fuck with brands, cause nigga I'm Haitian. Say the wrong shit and you're smacking their faces.